All right, let's see. Well, that was easy. Good morning, and welcome back to Tabletop Toolbox. Now, if this isn't the first video you've seen of the Beery Board Game Bash series, then you know what we're doing here. We're looking at some of the best, and some not so great, board games about brewing beer. And really, whether or not you knew that, here's a little spoiler alert. My #1 favorite beer-themed game is Brew Crafters, designed by Mr. Ben Rosset. Now, you might recognize Ben Rosset's name from one of his more recent hits, The Search for Planet X, which one of Santa's helpers did inform me should be arriving on my doorstep as soon as stocks are resupplied. But his name did catch my attention when he teamed up with Greater Than Games in 2018 to kickstart his second full-size beer-themed board game, Homebrewers. Now, if this is the first time we're meeting each other, you should probably know that I started homebrewing in 2011. And before long, I was joining local brew clubs, entering homebrew competitions, and spending what I could spare to continuously upgrade my equipment. So when this game came around and promised to recreate those first experiences as a new hobbyist in a local club, pitting my skills against new acquaintances, it was kind of a no-brainer. All in. Let's start with the rules, shall we? You begin a round by rolling 3 dice. And then in the spirit of the homebrew club, you can trade those dice with other players to try and line up the actions that you need for the round. You can trade as many times as you want, and if any player winds up with 3 dice showing the same face, they can re-roll those dice and play goes on. Now, if at the end of this round you still haven't gotten the actions that you need, hope is not lost. By spending $1, you can turn any die to any face you want. And if you're still struggling to get done everything that you need for the round, for another $3, you can add any action to your turn that you'd like. Additionally, players have asymmetrical powers, which typically lets them supplement their turn with 1 additional action, although this will cost another $1. Now, once you're all done trading, you'll, one at a time, start by taking your 3 actions. The actions are all pretty simple. First, you can collect a grain token, which in a hilarious bit of disconnection from reality, represents everything you need to brew a beer. That means that this represents this.
That's not how any of this works.
But I digress. You place that grain token in one of these 4 buckets in your garage, representing some generic styles of beer. The brew action consumes this grain token and lets you brew a batch of beer in the style that it came from. To do so, you'll flip it over to its trub side. That's a soft, soak-like byproduct of the fermentation process, and you get to place it in your leftmost available equipment spot. You then will move your player token up the appropriate track the number of spaces equal to the lines above your equipment space where you place that trub token. If you've managed to slot any upgrade cards beneath that style, you take those benefits now. And lastly, you take any benefits from the track which your player pawn passed over. The cleaning action lets you remove the rightmost trub token from your brewing equipment, giving you room to brew more beer and again reducing one of the most frustratingly fundamental steps of the brewing process down to a simple finger flick. Then we get to this action, the flavor cards I mentioned earlier. This is the only icon that appears twice on each die, and it lets you do one of 2 available actions. First, you can take one of the flavor cards from the available supply, placing it safely in your play area. But to use this card requires taking a second action from another die, and in doing so you can either take the action shown at the bottom of the card, discarding it from play, or you can tuck that card under one of the 4 beer styles in your garage. This effectively upgrades your engine, so to speak. The next time you brew this beer, you'll have some additional benefits that you can take. You might get some money back, you might notch up an adjacent style, or snag some extra points. Lastly, there's the calendar action, which references these tokens at the bottom of the board. Each round, one of these tokens is revealed, and it has a standard action at the top, as well as a power action at the bottom, which you can take with the combination of one of these dice and an extra $2. Now, these are the same 4 actions we've already discussed, which means that whether you roll the action on the dice, or you roll a calendar and take the action with the token on the bottom of the board, the end result is pretty much the same, unless you have a couple extra bucks to burn. Taking those 3 or so actions will happen in a flash, and setting up for the next round is as simple as a token flip and a fresh roll of the dice. On the 4th and 8th rounds, you'll have a festival, which acts more like a homebrewing competition. You'll score points based on how far you've climbed up the tracks, with the points varying based on which festival you're in and how many players you have. After the Oktoberfest round, you go into endgame scoring, pitting your beer styles against these judges, which were revealed at the start of the game. Now, these mostly relate to the flavor cards, the sweet, savory, and fruity cards that you can tuck under your brew styles. Some of these judges may want you to have one style with all 3 flavor cards, or they may want a total number of cards across all of your brew styles. And that's the game, really. You're racing up these tracks, trying to claw your way to the top as quick as possible in just a few short rounds. And it's fine. It's great. It's good, sorta. So we've talked about how the game plays. Let's take a moment to talk about how the game feels, especially from the angle of someone who's lived in it for the past 9 years. Brew days are often an all-day event that we've planned for quite some time, and reducing a lot of these actions down to a simple token flip kind of robs the hobby of its soul. I mean, this little token represents a variety of carefully chosen malts, resinous and flavorful hops, a specific yeast we've chosen for the style, and often even a full water profile that we've adapted with various salts and minerals to bring out the flavors of those ingredients. And then we have these equipment spaces with reducing quality from left to right. These seem to imply that we have good equipment and bad equipment, and that we might use our bad equipment if our good equipment is still dirty. And then there are these flavor cards, which, when I first unboxed this game and unwrapped these cards, I was filled with excitement at the possibilities that they presented. A milky oyster stout like Flying Dog Brewery's Pearl Necklace, a citrus-laden IPA like Triple Crossing's Clever Girl. But in reality, the only thing that matters of these cards are the colors and the iconography, which means you can rack up a ton of points with a citrus, bacon, lime, coffee IPA. And if you have any respect for the craft beer industry or are a home brewer yourself, well then I'm sorry I just put you through that. But it's just as off-putting to consider what these cards do to the gameplay. This one lets you climb an adjacent track one space, but no higher than halfway up the track, so you can get a little better at your IPAs when you brew a stout. This one gives you money each time you brew that style, which is interesting considering that it's illegal to sell homebrew in all 50 US states. But perhaps the final insult to injury is once you've climbed as high on this track as you can go, whether to the top or the space below it if someone's already there, you cannot brew that beer again, which means that if you've built some incredible engine to your ale, you may only get to use it a few times before it's off limits for good. Then there are these tracks, the core race mechanism of the game. Every time you brew a beer, you climb up this track, possibly reclaiming the lead and maybe cinching that next gold medal. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes we can struggle through multiple batches until we can hone our skills enough to make a medal-worthy beer. For example, I've made a handful of ciders in my day, and one of them got me this, a 3rd place reward for a competition I entered in South Carolina. But here's the truth. There were only 3 ciders entered in that category that day, and based on the feedback I got from the judges who were there, this is, at best, a participation trophy. However, I think what bothers me most is the restriction imposed by these 3 dice. I mean, to climb any track on a turn, you need 3 actions. You need the grain, you need to brew, and you need to clean, either before or after those other 2. Building your engine, however, takes a minimum of 2 actions, one to pick up the card and the other to slot it under your garage, which means throughout the game you'll either be building these powerful engines that you will rarely get to use, or you'll be taking the same measured leaps up these tracks, just trying to stay relevant amongst the other players. Now sure, you can spend a couple dollars to take an extra advantage, but money is purposefully hard to come by in this game. I mean, let's face it, homebrewing as a hobby doesn't legally generate any income, so you'll have to rely on luck, either snagging a few dollars as you climb these charts, or getting the right flavor cards to tuck underneath a bucket. You can also forego one of your 3 actions to take $2, but I can't see any player reasonably doing this in a turn. Ultimately, it turns homebrewing into a chore, which frankly no hobby should ever be. This game is to homebrewing what a Keurig coffee machine is to coffee. It's the shortest possible path you could take to get from point A to point B. While the end result may be enough to satisfy the craving, the truth is it's just not as good as it should be. Homebrewers as a game is challenging, fast-paced, and enjoyable. But as an homage to the homebrewing hobby, it's a nerve-wracking race against time that kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But it's not all bad news. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Mr. Rosset's 2013 title Brewcrafters is a masterpiece of a game with a fully upgradable brewery, a full collection of staff to hire, and real components you can collect to brew over a dozen different beers. We'll get into that one in the near future, so until then, cheers.